The atmosphere inside the International Chess Hall was almost sacred. Every sound seemed amplified. The faint cough of a spectator, the shuffle of polished shoes against marble, the subtle clicking of cameras that tried not to disturb the silence. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, reflecting on glossy wooden boards set neatly across the stage. Flags from more than 20 countries draped from the ceiling, giving the impression that this wasn't just a competition, but a battlefield between nations. On the central platform, under the full glare of the spotlights, sat the youngest and most unexpected finalist, Sofia Alvarez, a 17-year-old girl whose presence had already become the quiet story of the tournament. Her figure looked small against the backdrop of towering banners and professional players in tailored suits. Her hands, pale from nerves, hovered over the chessboard, fingers curling slightly as though they carried the weight of the entire match. Her clothing told the truth others tried to hide. While competitors arrived in crisp jackets, shining shoes, and watches worth more than her family's yearly rent, Sophia's blazer sagged slightly at the shoulders, the fabric worn thin from years of use. Her sneakers had frayed laces, and the sole of one shoe lifted just enough to reveal the hardship of countless walks. She carried no sponsor logos, no designer bag, only a battered school notebook filled with chaotic sketches of openings and endgames, its pages curling from rainwater. Yet her face betrayed something different. Her eyes, dark, sharp, unflinching, studied the board as though nothing else existed. In them there was no trace of fear, only the quiet determination of someone who had clawed her way into a place that society had tried to keep locked. Around her, whispers circulated. Journalists leaned closer, scribbling notes. Spectators exchanged glances, muttering, "Who is this girl? Where did she come from? How could she possibly be sitting here against champions trained since childhood?" The truth was stranger than any headline. Sophia had been born in one of the city's forgotten corners, a neighborhood where cracked sidewalks and rusted playgrounds told stories of abandonment. Her father disappeared when she was only a child, leaving behind nothing but a chair at the table and questions that were never answered. Her mother became the anchor of their tiny household, working endless shifts as a cleaner in downtown offices. She returned home late at night, her hands raw, her body aching, but her spirit unbroken. It was in this setting, far from polished chess clubs and glossy trophies, that Sophia's journey began. Her discovery of the game wasn't planned, but accidental. At the community center near her home, a dim, underfunded building where peeling paint revealed the brick underneath, she found an old wooden chessboard shoved in the corner of a dusty shelf. Half the pieces were missing, their absence filled by bottle caps, coins, and small stones. At first, she didn't even know what the strange figures meant, but curiosity turned into obsession. She sat for hours watching older men move the pieces with slow, deliberate gestures, their brows furrowed in thought. She studied not just the moves, but the rhythm, the confidence behind each decision. And when the hall emptied at night, she stayed behind, replaying the matches she had memorized, using whatever objects she could find to replace the missing rooks and pawns. What started as play became instinct. Patterns that others needed books to recognize appeared in her mind like lightning. Sacrifices, strategies, attacks. They flowed naturally as though she had been born with the language of chess already written into her. By the age of 14, she was defeating every local player who dared to sit across from her. Men who had played for 30 years leaned back in disbelief as her pawns dismantled their defenses. Some laughed it off, others grew frustrated, but slowly, word spread through the neighborhood. The girl with the broken board is unbeatable. Her mother noticed, even through her exhaustion. With no money to afford a coach, she used office printers late at night to copy strategy guides from free websites. She collected scraps of advice, diagrams of famous openings, and placed them quietly on the kitchen table for Sophia to study over breakfast. It was a silent partnership, a mother sacrificing hours of rest, a daughter devouring every page with hungry eyes. And now, 3 years later, Sophia sat on the grandest stage of them all. The journey from bottle caps to polished rooks seemed unreal. The other competitors had grown up in chess academies, surrounded by private tutors and endless resources. To them, Sophia was almost invisible, a curiosity, a footnote in their carefully planned victories. Some smiled at her with polite indifference, others with a trace of arrogance, certain that this girl from nowhere would crumble under the weight of the spotlight. But they misunderstood her. They had prepared for opponents trained in the same system, with the same privileges. What they hadn't prepared for was someone who had built her skills in silence, carved from necessity, sharpened by survival. As the announcer's voice echoed through the grand hall, listing names with perfect pronunciation, Sophia's heart pounded. When her name was finally called, it was spoken almost as an afterthought. Yet for her, it carried the weight of her entire life. She felt her mother's presence in the crowd, sitting in the cheapest seat, clutching her worn-out handbag, her eyes filled with pride and tears she refused to let fall. This was not just a tournament. This was the moment Sophia had been walking towards since the first time she replaced a missing pawn with a bottle cap. And as the first move was about to be made, she promised herself she would not waste it. The tournament hall transformed into a crucible of silence and intensity. Each match stretched across hours, yet felt like a heartbeat suspended in time. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, breaths held as clocks ticked with merciless precision. Every move etched itself into history, an invisible battle where no swords clashed, but destinies were carved one square at a time. Sophia's journey through the early rounds was nothing short of improbable. Her first opponent, a polished prodigy from France, greeted her with a condescending smirk as if the game were already won. He wore a suit so crisp it seemed carved from marble, his gold cufflinks catching the light with every move. Yet by the 35th turn, his smile dissolved into disbelief. Sophia's rook cut through his defenses like lightning, her endgame merciless and precise. When he finally toppled his king in defeat, the room rippled with whispers. Was it luck? A fluke? Or something else? Round after round, the same pattern repeated. Opponents underestimated her, then crumbled under the weight of her relentless logic. Her style was unconventional, aggressive when others played safe, patient when others lunged. Commentators struggled to categorize her, scribbling frantic notes. She breaks theory, she bends it, she rewrites it. But the further she advanced, the sharper the ridicule became. Reporters published headlines that reduced her victories to novelty. The Cinderella of chess. Lucky streak for the girl with no coach. Rivals whispered in lounges, dismissing her as a temporary distraction before the real champions clashed in the finals. Even in triumph, she was treated like an intruder in a world that had never made space for her. And then came the semifinal. Her opponent, Viktor Mikhailov, the Russian powerhouse, ranked among the top 5 players in the world. At only 23, he was already celebrated as the future of international chess. Tall, broad-shouldered, with ice-blue eyes and a jaw sculpted like stone, Victor carried himself with the aura of inevitability. His suits were tailored, his watch a gleaming masterpiece, his presence commanding every camera in the room. When he sat across from Sophia, he barely looked at her. Instead, he adjusted his cuff, sipped from his crystal water glass, and leaned back with the air of someone humoring a child. "Don't be nervous," he murmured, his accent sharp. "Enjoy this moment. It will be the highlight of your career." The audience chuckled softly, but Sophia didn't flinch. Her hands steadied on the board, her eyes narrowing not in fear, but in focus. She had faced dismissals her entire life. What was one more? The match began, and Victor opened with his signature attack, a line he had perfected under the guidance of world-class coaches. The commentators nodded knowingly. He's playing to end this quickly. The crowd leaned in, waiting for Sophia to stumble. But she didn't. "Move after move," she answered, not with hesitation but with precision so cold it silenced the whispers. She countered his every strategy, turning defense into ambush, patience into traps. Victor's trademark confidence began to crack. His hand hovered over the board longer than usual, his brow furrowing as he realized she wasn't playing the part of a scared underdog. She was dismantling him. At the 50-second move, gasps echoed through the hall. Sophia sacrificed her queen, a move so bold, so reckless, that commentators cried out in shock. Reporters leapt from their seats, but within 6 turns the board revealed the truth. The sacrifice wasn't reckless. It was perfect. Victor's king was trapped. Checkmate. The silence that followed was deafening. Cameras clicked, flashes burst, but for a heartbeat the entire hall was frozen in disbelief. Then, as Victor pushed back his chair, pale and defeated, the applause erupted like thunder. Sophia didn't smile, didn't raise her fists. She simply lowered her gaze to the board, breathing slowly, as though confirming to herself that it was real. Her mother, seated far in the back, pressed her trembling hands to her mouth, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. The impossible had happened. The girl from nowhere had defeated the untouchable champion. But it wasn't over. One final match remained. The grand final, against the reigning world champion, a legend feared not just for his skill, but for the ruthless psychological warfare he unleashed on every opponent. And as Sophia left the stage, the world was no longer whispering. It was roaring. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a fluke. This was destiny demanding to be seen. The Grand Hall was no longer just a stage. It had become an arena. Every seat was filled. Every camera pointed toward the board that stood like an altar at the center. Reporters from across the globe crowded behind velvet ropes, their lenses capturing every flicker of emotion, every subtle tremor of a hand. The tension was suffocating, thick enough to be felt in every corner of the room. At one end of the board sat Sophia, her worn sneakers tucked beneath her chair, her notebook resting on her lap like a talisman. Across from her loomed the man the world called the Emperor, Magnus Eberhardt, reigning world champion for nearly a decade. He was more than just a player. He was a legend. His victories were not simply wins. They were demolitions. Rivals crumbled under his cold gaze long before the first piece was moved. Stories were told of how he broke opponents without raising his voice, leaning forward, staring directly into their eyes until their confidence dissolved like sand in a storm. Tonight, his presence was almost supernatural. His tailored black suit shimmered under the chandeliers, his silver tie perfectly knotted, his watch glinting like a crown jewel. His eyes, gray and sharp, fixed on Sophia with an expression that was neither contempt nor amusement, but something colder, inevitability. As the announcer declared their names, the hall erupted into thunderous applause. World champion Magnus Eberhardt. Cameras flashed, fans roared. Then, almost as an afterthought, the announcer's voice softened. In challenger, Sofia Alvarez. A smaller ripple of applause followed, respectful but uncertain, as if the crowd itself doubted she belonged here. Magnus leaned forward, his voice low, carrying just enough for her to hear. "You've done well, little one," he said, his German accent slicing through the silence. "But fairy tales end when the king awakens." The clock was set. The match began. Magnus opened with his signature, a ruthless, hyper-aggressive line known to crush even seasoned grandmasters. Commentators immediately recognized it, an omen of how he planned to tear through her defenses. His pieces advanced like soldiers in formation, pawns storming forward, knights slashing into position. It was suffocating, merciless. Sophia's fingers trembled as she reached for her pawn. For a heartbeat, the weight of it all pressed on her. The cameras, the headlines, the mocking voices that said she didn't belong here. Her chest tightened. And then, her eyes flicked to the crowd. There she was, her mother sitting in the very last row, clutching her handbag as if it were armor. Her tired hands, her tear-streaked face, her unwavering gaze. Sophia inhaled, steadying herself. She wasn't here for the cameras. She wasn't here for the headlines. She was here for the woman who had given everything so she could dream. Her hands steadied. The pawn slid forward. The game unfolded like a war. Magnus attacked with machine-like precision, his every move daring Sophia to falter. Twice she came within a hair's breadth of disaster, her defenses straining under the weight of his assault. Gasps rippled through the audience as she clung to survival, sacrificing material to stay afloat. Commentators whispered urgently, predicting her imminent collapse. But Sophia had grown up surviving storms. She had endured hunger, loneliness, nights studying under dim streetlights, because electricity was cut off at home. Pressure was not her enemy, it was her birthplace. And so she adapted. Where Magnus played by the book, Sophia bent the rules. Her style was unpredictable, shaped by years of studying games with bottle caps and coins. She saw moves no one else dared consider. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. By the 38th move, Magnus's confidence cracked. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. The emperor, who never blinked, now shifted in his chair. Sophia had clawed her way back into the game, countering his attack with a dazzling sequence that left the commentators breathless. But Magnus was still Magnus. He struck back with ruthless precision, and once again the board teetered on the edge of collapse. Sophia closed her eyes for half a second, and in that instant, memories rushed in. Her first makeshift board at the community center, the laughter men she had beaten, her mother placing printed diagrams on the kitchen table. All the nights she had whispered to herself, "One day they will see me." Her eyes snapped open. The world around her faded. There was only the board. On the 46th move, Sophia made a decision that would be remembered for decades. She advanced her knight into a trap so reckless, so suicidal, that the commentators erupted in disbelief. "She's lost her mind," one whispered. Magnus smirked, sensing victory. He lunged, capturing her knight with ruthless satisfaction. And then it happened. Like dominoes, the board collapsed. Not against Sophia, but against Magnus. The sacrifice had been a disguise, a curtain hiding the true dagger. Within 5 moves, his queen was cornered, his king forced into retreat. The audience rose to their feet as realization spread. Magnus's face, usually unreadable, contorted in shock. He slammed his hand against the clock, eyes darting across the board, desperate to find an escape. There was none. Sophia's rook slid into position. Checkmate. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the hall. The emperor had fallen. Then the eruption came. An explosion of sound so deafening it shook the chandeliers. Reporters screamed into microphones. Spectators wept openly. Cameras flashed like lightning. Sophia sat frozen, staring at the board as if unable to believe it herself. Across from her, Magnus slumped back in his chair, his hand covering his face. The invincible king had been dethroned by a girl no one believed in. Sophia slowly rose to her feet. The crowd surged into applause that seemed endless, unstoppable. She turned toward the back of the hall where her mother stood, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time that night, Sophia allowed herself to smile. In that moment, she was no longer just the poor girl from a forgotten neighborhood. She was the world champion, the embodiment of resilience, the living proof that greatness can come from anywhere. And as she lifted the trophy, its golden surface reflecting the lights, the cameras, the dreams of millions, her voice trembled but carried through the hall. This victory is for everyone who was ever told they don't belong. The applause became a roar, not just of celebration, but of recognition. History had been rewritten, and the world would never forget the name Sofia Alvarez.